Hello everyone and welcome to our next lecture of software design and architecture. By now we have talked a lot about UML and its models and how, where and when can we use those models. Now this lecture will be a high level view of what we have done by now. So in this lecture we are going to talk about documenting the software architecture. And we'll talk about a concept called the N+1 view model. Let's understand what do we mean by this. So before we get started with the architecture, in fact we start with the software architecture, let's understand the term architecture itself in terms of civil engineering. And for that, let's read what does one of the architects, one of the French architects has to say. And of course he's not a software architect. So he said that you employ stone, wood and concrete, and with these materials you build houses and palaces. That is actually called construction, ingenuity at work. But suddenly you touch my heart, you do me good, I'm happy, and I say that is beautiful. So that is architecture. So what do we mean by this? That means that everyone will have the material, the building material will be same, but whenever the building is finally coming up, it is going to look different. That means that architecture is the one which is making something beautiful. So in other words, we can say that architecture is actually the structuring or organization of the things. Well, in the meanwhile, you can have a look at this landmark by the same architect, which was built in 1954. So what makes it beautiful is the organization and structuring of the material that he has used. So similarly, if we want to understand the software architecture, we can really understand that in terms of organization and structuring. But in this case, we are talking about the organization and structuring of the software elements, and those software elements may be the classes, the components, subcomponents of your system, or the modules. So how you decide to arrange or structure them will actually be called the software architecture. So by Wikipedia it says that software architecture refers to the fundamental structures of the software system, and the discipline of creating such structures and systems is called the software architecture. Each structure comprises software elements, relations among them, and properties of both. By both we mean the elements and the relations. And for your information, that architecture that we just talked about has to be recorded somewhere, and the document that we use to record that architecture is usually called software architecture document. In short, we call it as SAD. Well, it's not that sad, but this document is the one which is used for recording the details of our architecture. And usually the benefit of recording the architecture and creating the document is that one of the benefits is that new developers joining your team can learn the big ideas that you have used in the system, so they'll have a very good view. Another reason for using and creating that document is very similar, that is, everyone in the team would be on the same page. They would know that what is happening and what has happened already in the project. So the SAD has some views also. So that means architecture, or maybe our system, is so huge that its representation, the structuring and organization, will definitely be huge. So what we do is, whenever something is very huge, we try to break it down and we try to see a smaller portion of it. This helps us overcome the complexity. So for software architecture document, we can have different views in that document, where every view will be focusing on a specific perspective of the system. We will talk about the what do we mean by architectural views in the next slide. So the SAD describes the big ideas, and those big ideas are very helpful for the newcomers. and they are very easily able to understand by reading at the software architecture document. So guys, once again, to highlight the importance of those software architecture documents, let's consider a scenario that, for example, you join the development team of the case study that we have been talking about in this course, the next generation project. So your project manager or coach would say, hey, welcome to the project, and before getting started with anything, please go to the project website and read that 10-page SAD, and that SAD is going to give you a brief introduction of the big ideas, the bigger picture of the system. And then later, during a subsequent release, when new people work on the system, SAD can be the learning aid of the system. They can help the people to learn what is happening. But whenever you are writing that software architecture document, you should keep two things in mind. First one is the audience. So guys, audience is the newly joining people, and the other group of audience is the people who are currently on your team. And the second thing that you should keep in mind is the goal of your document. Again guys, the goal of the document is that you really want the reader of the document to quickly understand and overview the major ideas of your system. Now what happens is that, as I told you, that your system is, for example, a very huge entity, and that huge entity would have huge representation. That means your architecture size will be huge. You have to divide it into smaller portions. Those smaller portions in which you divide your architecture are usually called architectural views. Let me explain it in another way. If we just go through the definition quickly, it says that architecture view is a view of the system architecture, the whole complete architecture, from a given perspective. So what we try to do is that we try to look at the architecture portion by portion, angle by angle, perspective by perspective. So every perspective might focus on the structure, the modularity, the essential components, or the main control flows. And remember, you cannot highlight all of these things at one single place, so you have to divide that into smaller portions and then explain them in your document one by one. So an important aspect of the view which is missing from this document is the motivation. You should also be having a motivation of the view. Whenever you are showing a particular view, you should also tell the reader that why this view is important. You should explain the importance as well. Well, look at this room. Well, this room is here so that we can understand the concept of architectural view analogically. So if you look at this room right now, you have this beautiful architecture, and you have a number of furniture elements in this room, including the couches, the table, this beautifully hanged LED at the beautiful wooden frame. You have this window and a beautiful view outside this window, and then you have this lamp, the lights, the roof, which is called the ceiling, and of course this wall and the floor. So there are so many things that actually are there in front of you. But to keep the thing simple and to increase your focus, what you can do is you can look through a simple window, and through this window you will only be able to focus at the particular portion of the view at one time. So if you look at the room now, you can see that I'm only focusing on the LED and the table and that wooden frame. Now if I want to focus on a much smaller part, I can reduce the size of the window. So to understand the concept of architectural view, you can say that an architectural view is a window onto a system from a particular perspective. So if you want to look at different part of the room, you will have to have a different window, or that window will have a different perspective. And that perspective emphasizes the key noteworthy information or ideas, and of course it ignores the details which are not required. So now if we further try to understand that what is an architectural view, so you can say that architectural view is a tool of communication, education, or thought, and it is expressed in terms of a text and UML diagrams. So now one more addition, that is that you have the combination of UML diagrams and the written commentary, which is the text, and this combination represents or creates your software architecture document. And a particular view in your document is just like a 1-minute elevator. So 1-minute elevator says that if you are there in the elevator with your colleague or a friend, what will be the most important things that you would say in 1 minute? So that means I just want to quickly skim through the document. In fact, if I go and read the document, I should be getting the most important parts of your system. So that's why the key idea for the architectural view is that the view do not describe all of the system from some perspective, but it only describes the outstanding ideas, which are the most important extraordinary parts of the system. Now, as we know that what are architectural views, we must also know that at what stage we can create those views, either at the start of the project, at the middle of the project, or at the end of the project. So yes, we can create an architectural view after the system is built. So we can build it as a summary and learning aid for the future developers. So for example, right now we are on our design road, we are at the end. We have done all the modeling and stuff. Implementation is there. Now we can in parallel we can create the architectural views so that people can understand. One more possibility of creating those architectural views is that we can create them at the end of certain iteration milestones. So if we are going iteratively, we can decide that at particular end or time of the iteration we are going to update or create an architectural view, or we are going to add the details to our SAD, which is the architectural document. And another possibility for creating those views is to create those views speculatively. That means during the early iterations we can create them as an aid in creative design work, recognizing the original view will change as design and implementation proceeds. So we can have a very basic format or initial version of our document, and we will foresee that it will definitely change as we change our design and implementation, as we progress in our design and implementation phase. Now let's talk about that how we can create those views. And the very first question could be, as I told that there could be a number of views, so what kind or type of views could be there? One possibility for the number of views is having 4+1 views. So there is a model called 4+1 view model, which is proposed by one of the researchers, and he says that there could be 4+1 views, including the logical view, the process view, deployment, and the data view. And the additional view that we are talking as the +1 is basically the use case view. But as the time passed and the improvements have been made, we came up with the N+1 model, which is very similar to 4+1 model. And this is because in a system we can have a number of views, countless views are possible. So that's why we came up with more than 4+1 views. And some of the common views which are listed here include the logical view, process, deployment, data, security, implementation, development, and use case view. And that's very obvious, as by the names. This deployment view, for example, can highlight the deployment aspects. The security perspective can be mentioned by the security view. And we can have all of this list or the number of views which we finally want to include in our software architecture document. And whichever view do you are interested, you can just go and focus on that part of the document and you're good to go.